In the mid-60s, Paul McCartney was interviewed and he went on record to say that many Beatles songs had disappeared. He goes on to say that at least 50 songs that he and John had written, simply vanished. It has been speculated that the missing songs may have been stockpiled and used for Beatle albums recorded after Paul died in late 1966 and performed by the various Fauls that have been used in the studio. Is it possible that any leftover songs were used for future McCartney solo and Wings albums? In early 1973, Paul McCartney decided that he and his band Wings would record the album Band on the Run in the exotic Lagos, Nigeria. They would find the location a challenge and studio primitive. Aside from the challenges presented by the primitive studio, various incidents plagued Wings' Lagos stay. While out walking one night against advice, Paul and Linda were robbed at knife point. The assailants made away with all of their valuables and even stole a bag containing a notebook full of handwritten lyrics and songs, and cassettes containing demos for songs to be recorded. So, we know for certain that McCartney has verified both Beatle and solo songs have either gone missing or were stolen. Is it quite possible that the missing songs in question have been found and are currently being recorded by a new generation of artists? Behold the famous Groupies. That verse is course taken from the Wings song, Famous Groupies, which is featured on the London Town album, released in March of 1978. There is a band out of Glasgow, Scotland that goes by the name of Famous Groupies. I have made mention of them in a previous video and I was curiously interested in an instrumental track that I had stumbled onto quite accidentally while doing a search on previous Wings albums. I was perplexed by the obvious clues that the band had dropped, much like a bread trail of crumbs. You see, the instrumental, which goes by the title of November 9th, 1966 was the first clue. That date struck me as a very odd title, as it happens to be one of the suggested dates of Paul McCartney's death as per the November car crash that killed and decapitated him, in 1966. When I hit play on the track, which is nicely placed on the page called Secrets, I was awestruck by the similarities to McCartney's instrumental Junk. Yes, there was some clear borrowing in play here, but I was even more so taken by the signature of the two songs. The writer seemed to be channeling McCartney in a way I had not quite heard before. There are many artists and groups who have written in the style of Paul McCartney, but not quite like this. The signature style and feel of the writing and even the performance are expertly spot on and remarkably comfortable. This piqued my interest and I had to explore the Famous Groupies a bit further. What I turned up has been nothing short of odd. More questions than answers forced me to contact the band and inquire best I could. Upon visiting the band's website, famousgroupies.rocks, I could instantly see by their headline quote, "The future is the past." I was in for a strange tour. The band leader and chief writer of Famous Groupies goes by the name of Kirkcaldy Mackenzie. There was something familiar about that name, but I couldn't place why. I finally would, but I'll get into that later. Kirkcaldy goes on to introduce himself and proclaim that he was born to time-traveling parents who lived in a house that phased in and out of the mid-1970s, particularly the years of 1970 to 1976. Such an incredibly odd thing to say. He goes on to unabashedly announce his love of all things McCartney. Nothing unusual about that if you're a big fan, as there are many big McCartney fans in the world. But, he then goes on to say that the Famous Groupies will soon be releasing a great many songs inspired by his time-traveling youth. And now that I have been lured into the unusual idea of this group, this last bit of text wasn't too unusual. Until I clicked on the next page of their site. Under the Discover page, Kirkcaldy tells us a bit about the band and their duties. After he lists his own duties, he follows it up by saying that he is the keeper of McCartney's lost songs, possibly. Possibly? Now this is indeed a very unusual thing to state. Why would anyone say such a thing if it weren't true? A somewhat dangerous game to play, I would think. Let me recap what I have learned so far. 1. An instrumental track that sounds more like early Paul McCartney than anything I have ever heard before. 2. The group's website offering obvious clues to a far-fetched idea that they are in the possession of McCartney's lost songs. The proof is in the pudding, as they say, and I would need more evidence before I would ever believe such a claim. And even though McCartney has gone on record as saying that 50 John and Paul songs went missing in the 60s, coupled with the other missing songs from the Wings era, after Paul and Linda were robbed at knife point, at least I am certain that there are indeed many missing songs out there somewhere, and it is not unreasonable to assume that those missing songs will resurface someday, by someone. Also, I found the group's debut album title to be a potential clue as well. Rehearsing the Multiverse suggests that in another universe the missing McCartney songs have been recorded and released, and that they are now a staple in the history of the respective writer's catalogue, as well as the backdrop of the baby boomers who listened to them while growing up in the 1970s. An interesting notion. The group's SoundCloud site features the remarkable instrumental, seemingly dedicated to the passing of Paul McCartney on November 9, 1966. And it also features a second track called We All Fall Down. After listening to the tracks several times, I was incredibly impressed by the sheer believability of the music and lyrics. This song could have easily been found on the Wings album Band on the Run, or Venus and Mars. The writing is excellent for the style and era, and yes, it does indeed sound like a McCartney penned tune. However, there does not seem to be any pinching of any sort. This song, to me, does in fact sound like an original penned McCartney and Wings gem. You don't hear music like this anymore, and certainly not well written for the era, or the Wings genre. Was this song actually written in the mid-70s? Could this be one of the lost McCartney songs? If so, are there more? My interest is fully piqued now, but I would need to hear more of these lost songs before I could make an semi-informed judgment. I have since asked to review the album, but no reply from Mr. Mackenzie as of yet. Ah yes, that name. Kirkcaldy Mackenzie? It sounds familiar, doesn't it? I did a bit of research into the character names that have been used in McCartney songs over the years, and I found that both Kirkcaldy and Mackenzie have been used. It's possible that this is simply a play name or an alias. And it's quite possible that it is in fact his given name and that this is all purely coincidental. Other band members include Faul Mackenzie on bass guitar. Well, this is clearly a blatant in-your-face clue, isn't it? To use the name Faul strikes me as an extreme oddity, more so than the actual photo of the real Paul. Why not use a photo of Paul McCartney instead of the real Paul? And speaking of Faul or fake Paul, on the group's site, if you click on the journal page, you will find one post only, and that post features a guest bass performance by none other than Mitch Weissman. Mitch was the original fake Paul for the wildly popular group in the late 70s called Beatlemania. They played well over 1,000 shows and spent 2 years on Broadway. There was even a film made about this cover band. Why would famous groupies enlist the first fake Paul to play bass on the track We All Fall Down? What's really going on here? I covered every inch of the famous Groupies website and I found something written in a dark text, making it very difficult to see. The text reads, "Special thanks to Bill for allowing us to explore his catalogue. Either the band is dropping large clues or they are being wildly cheeky. I will keep up with any news or information that I should acquire in the future. And I will certainly review and share more music once the album is released, which is slated for April." The website is famousgroupies.rocks. And if there is anyone out there with more information, please do contact me.